Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the warm welcome and for setting me up well, Sebastian, with your references to inflation and the summer boom. My name is Aoife. I am Senior Director for Commercial at STR, based in the London office and looking after our international business. It brings me great pleasure to be in Paris. I worked in Paris at the very beginning of my career. In fact, I worked for Concorde Hotels, which previously had its name on right at the top of this tower. So it really brings back great memories to be here today. So I'm going to talk you through STR insights, what has happened thus far, and what we expect to happen for the remainder of the year and into 2023. Before I do that, just to talk a little bit about consumer sentiment, because it actually weighs greatly on what is happening in our hotels and what we are experiencing. So we have, since the beginning of the pandemic, tracked consumer sentiment by means of surveying a traveller panel. And this panel is about 2,000 people, primarily EMEA-based, a little bit of North America, a little bit of APAC. And as you can see, right back to August 2020, 56% of those surveyed had not booked or undertaken any travel at that time. But in our last survey, only 16% had not booked or undertaken travel. That is pretty phenomenal, considering there are still, especially generationally, a number of people that have not picked up their travel habits yet. But we expect that will return fully by next year. Now, although sentiment is still somewhat in negative territory, it's not all linked to COVID-19. All of those restrictions that have been lifted, all of the costs associated with traveling during the COVID-19 pandemic was very limiting. But what has started, and as you're all aware in the media, what started during the summer months, of course, was the travel disruption that we were seeing all over the press that made us not really want to travel that much or to take a flight, certainly. And of course, we have economic uncertainty laid on top of that and the risks that are associated with spending those pent-up savings that everybody has. There's a little bit of risk associated with that now. So domestic, pretty much fully back, and I'm sure you've all traveled domestically. Internationally, not quite back yet. So down by 31%. That's the net propensity, that's our own KPI, but 31% less likely to travel internationally. After the pandemic, however, demand is expected to increase. So domestically and internationally, we're looking at a 30% lift on 2019 travel once the pandemic is fully over. Now, for us in Europe, it's pretty much over. But if you think about APAC and China, it's not quite there yet. So there's still, chunks of the globe that are still experiencing COVID and the restrictions linked with it. Now, that sentiment is probably more biased towards leisure. Business travel is quite different. Now, in the room today, and actually in the last, I would say, year, we've seen conferences happen, we've seen great attendance, we've started to see corporate travel happen as well. But only 46 of the traveller panel, 46% of them are likely to undertake business travel in the next 12 months. So that's really only half. So there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is, I don't really want to travel as much as I did in the past. It's not saying I won't travel, but it's saying I may travel less. But it's also, there's a lot of budgetary restrictions, particularly in the banks. They're slow to open up the doors for travel. So we're really seeing limitations on business travel. So what has changed dramatically, certainly since even our last survey, is that it's no longer COVID, it's no longer the health risks that are associated with travel. It truly is the comfort and the financial element. So the comfort being last-minute cancellations, the risk of not being refunded for your travel, etc. And of course, financial, putting that economic uncertainty and those economic headwinds that we're all expecting to see in the coming months and already experiencing. So what does it actually look like up until? So this data, the rolling 7 days data that I'm going to show you runs up to the 29th of August. So as you can see, Europe, Middle East and the United States has all but recovered. APAC and China are lagging slightly behind. That zero COVID policy that China is still maintaining and those borders being closed means that Chinese travellers are not going into Asia, and of course the Asian and European travellers are not going into China. So it's starting to move, we're starting to see some movement, but there's still a huge amount of restriction. But Europe has all but fully recovered. So the Middle East is just 3% off full recovery in terms of occupancy, the United States just 4% off, and Europe just 5% off. So 95% recovered. What an amazing result at the end of August. Now, to put that into context, Europe as a whole at the end of July, so I'm just talking about full month processing for July, we're sitting at 75% occupancy, which is a phenomenal result considering the impact of Omicron in the first couple of months of 2022. Now, what really has boosted this, of course, we had the summer boom, and I'll talk more about that, but also the key gateway cities are starting to recover. So you can see there is a sea of green across most cities, and that means that they have recovered at anywhere between 80 to 100% of 2019 levels. Obviously, if you look to the east, it's much lower, below that 80% recovery. So that boost that we're getting from the key gateway cities, complementing what we're already seeing in the regions, the resorts, the coastal and country destinations, is really helping that recovery. The summer has been particularly kind to Europe, in fact, kinder when you compare to other continents. So you can see all countries have fully recovered, and at the end of August, there's a few exceptions, a few outliers. Austria and Germany still, kind of the aftermath of Omicron, have had a much slower journey back to full recovery, but also with the war in Ukraine and that Central and Eastern Europe interregional travel slowing down, it's really impacting the countries over to the east. But if you look at the UK, France, Greece, etc., all fully recovered during the summer months. And as of the 28th of August, you can see that Italy has outpaced in terms of occupancy, Turkey and France just at 99% of where it was in 2019. So a fantastic end for Europe. This is just a little map to show you the occupancy indices across Europe. So the red is where occupancy has recovered at 50% of where it was in 2019, and the green right up to 125%. So the UK, I know, Sebastian, you missed that one for inflation, but the UK had an early recovery than the rest of the continent simply because of the light restrictions or no restrictions that were put in place from December, whereas in Europe there were a large number of restrictions put in place around Omicron. So you can see much of the northern and western part of Europe has fully recovered and is outperforming 2019. But if you go east into the DACH region, it is slower to recover. So again, gateway cities. So some stand out: Edinburgh, Dublin, Paris, all recovering at 90%. But again, you can see the same as what I mapped out in the previous slide. A lot of those cities still have a long way to go in recovering to 2019 levels. That is not to say, however, that the country as a whole has not recovered, as those resorts and coastal and country destinations have outperformed 2019 levels. So what's really telling as to corporate travel not yet being back is, of course, the weekday business. So this is mapping from the 10th of April, weekly performance in comparison to 2019, right up to the 28th of August. So weekday to the left, you can see that it's slowly ramped up from kind of May time, and we're seeing a 5% to a 10% dip on 2019 levels, but it's not there yet. Whereas the weekend is only 5%, and at the end of August outperformed 2019 levels. So really it's indicative for us that corporate travel is not quite there yet. And of course that is underpinned by groups, conferences and events not yet being back. And if you look at that, 50-60% down in demand week on week since the 10th of April, right up until the end of August. But if you look at the transient demand, primarily leisure is compensating for some of that, which is allowing for the occupancy performance, but we're not quite there yet. However, a lot of the cancellations that happened at the beginning of the year are being pushed right into the last quarter. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the next few months. Will we move into positive territory in the conference and events across Europe? I think we'll get very, very close. There's a lot of compression in that business mix coming through. Also, dependent on the type of hotel or the class of hotel that you are operating, the occupancy differs. So for the luxury class, again, it's been slower to recover in terms of occupancy, certainly not in rate, recovering at 82%, whereas economy class, which really wasn't impacted during COVID as much as the other classes, has recovered at 97% of 2019 levels. Now, the reasons for economy class outperforming the luxury and the upper upscale is, of course, no dependency or very little dependency on international travel, very little dependency on groups and events, and their location outside of city centre locations means that they were able to attract domestic business and also a different type of corporate traveller. So very, very different depending on the class of hotel that you're in. Now, of course, what everyone is interested in is the ADR. What a performance in ADR we have seen across all continents, but particularly Europe. So the Middle East has its peaks and troughs just because of shifts in, well, firstly, the amount of events that they're having, but also shifts in Ramadan, etc. So just ignore the Middle East, but I would say that the Middle East really didn't experience the pandemic as we did in Europe. But you can see from April, Easter time, Europe, which is the green line, just started to grow and grow and grow. And as the summer came along, it just almost had a bit of a hockey stick in terms of ADR. So Middle East down 18%, US up 16%, and at the end of August, ADR for Europe up by 25%. Now, some hotels, I'm sure, experienced 100% lift on their ADR, but aggregate for Europe, including those key gateway cities, where ADR was probably not driven at that point, up 25%, an amazing result. So very different to the occupancy chart that I showed you for Europe, there is a sea of green here. And you can see that those dark greens, if you look at Côte d'Azur, I think stands out, up to 338% on 2019 levels. So very specific to a class of hotel, very specific to markets, but really it's a story of ADR. And also ADR, strangely, is not taking any heed of occupancy. So demand generates occupancy. Occupancy usually drives ADR in the markets that we're sitting in. Not anymore, it seems, or certainly for now. So the luxury class, although it hasn't achieved the occupancy levels that it has in 2019, it has managed to grow ADR by 45%. Now, remembering that some cities may not have grown at that level, but some resort destinations may have absolutely outgrown that 45%. But again, in aggregate, up 45%, and even the economy class has grown by 10%. So an amazing result, particularly for luxury, and that's really what has been driving that 25% lift that I showed you earlier on the bar chart. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of questions about ADR and what's going to happen next year, and I will bring you through that. But really, ADR is not a result of, well, of course it's a result of amazing revenue management. It's a result of compression, I would say, on some peak nights, particularly at the weekends. It's a result also of compression in specific markets. But it also had to be done by hotels to compensate for the cost of doing business. So we're looking at nominal ADR is the actualized performance. So week on week, we're looking at nominal ADR up at the 27th of August by about 20% on 2019. But if you strip out the inflation, which is the light blue bar, you get the real ADR. So actually Europe has only really recovered since mid-June in terms of real ADR. So the cost of doing business, inflation, the restricted labour market really had to be compensated somewhat through driving ADR. So the results are there. It's taken some time to get to the real ADR index, but we are there, which means the hotels are going to start to see a good bottom line. So a look into the future. Across major markets, certainly most markets, business on the books is much improved. So the green bars that you're looking at is business on the books for the next 90 days in London, Paris, and Brussels. And comparing to same time last year is the blue line. So you can see in many markets we have double the amount of business on the books going into the next 90 days, and some more, some less, depending on the day of week. So it's looking good. If we step back to the end of May, when we looked 90 days out, so when we looked at the summer, June, July, and August for key gateway cities, there was about 45 to 50% on the books already. Looked pretty good. A lot of that was leisure, so that was booked in advance. Markets like Edinburgh already had 61%. Again, a lot of that linked to the Fringe Festival and everything that goes on in Edinburgh. We also had the US travellers starting to come through. So it was really, really positive outlook at the end of May for the next 90 days. And of course, we saw the result of that. If we look at the end of August for the next 90 days, it's a little bit lower. The average business on the books looks a little bit lighter. So again, markets like Edinburgh, the impact is greater, but looking at London, Paris, 35, 37%. Now this is the variance between that May outlook to the September outlook. 4%, 5%. I think that can be picked up by business travel, by late bookings. I think there is no doubt that actually the occupancy recovery in the last quarter will be very similar to what we've already seen in the summer. So that summer boom may well be a winter boom. Different type of clientele, and maybe there will be some more planning, but I feel like corporate travel will fill that gap as we go through the next few months. So again, a very positive outlook for the key gateway cities. What is really helping that is the return of events, conferences and events. STR has been showing these slides throughout the pandemic, and we've been looking at business on the books, so we did have to take one break when there was no business on the books. But when we started looking at business on the books again, it was all sporting events, concerts, music events that we were looking forward, and we were starting to see peaks. So definitely the leisure and domestic travel was impacting that. Now I'm pleased to say that we're looking at true conference and events across key cities that are filling up well in advance. So you can see some good examples of some key city events here. So on to recession or economic headwinds. You choose. I think for our forecast, we've just published, we did our August publication of forecasts, and we are calling it economic headwinds as opposed to a recession. The reason we are doing that, so we have a very positive outlook, which I'm going to show you for the remainder of the year and into 2023. And one of the core reasons we're able to do that is we're riding on the back of a very strong Q4. We are going to go into a little bit of a lull as we go into the end of the year and into 2023, but it's going to pick up very, very quickly. One of the reasons that we expect that to pick up is demand is there. So the dark blue circle is the demand for 2022 forecasted. So London was expecting 11% less demand. It still performed very, very well. Next year, just 1% less demand than 2019, which basically means it's back to normal. The long haul business is back, the medium haul business is back, leisure is back, business travel is back, and conference and events are back. Look at Berlin. It's expecting to outperform 2019 in terms of demand. So that gives us great confidence for the forecast that we have for 2023. In aggregate, Europe has already hit 2019 levels, and the forecast is expected to continue. So European cities is the dark purple line. So since Q2 2022, it has outperformed 2019 in RevPAR terms, as have the aggregate of UAE cities and the US. APAC is coming up behind in 2023. And we expect at the end of the year that 16 European markets, and we only forecast gateway cities, will recover by 100% or more in RevPAR terms in 2022. So the likes of Athens, Belfast, Paris expecting full recovery and in some cases an outperformance of 2022. And the rest will follow. So if we look at this pace, and if I just bring your attention to the right-hand side of the screen, we can see that going into Q4 2022, we expect a 6% lift in RevPAR versus 2019. We go into Q1, it slows down, just a 2% lift in RevPAR. So despite how much you drive those rates, it's not going to impact because of the demand that's coming through. But then as we follow through the end of the year, it grows 6%, 11%, 10%. Now, much of that is driven by ADR. The occupancy is not quite there yet, as you can see, so it's the green line. You can see that it's going to get up to that 80% mark by the end of 2023. And you look at these ADR, the blue the blue chart here, you can see that ADR is the same, and I guess that is going to worry you all. Why is ADR not growing any further in STR forecasts in 2023? And what we truly believe is because it has grown so much to compensate for the cost of doing business, but because inflation is going to come down again next year, pushing ADR more on top of what already has been pushed in 2022 is going to be challenging as the different business mix comes in. So we can drive ADR in different segments for sure, but as the business mix becomes more dynamic, as we open up to different markets that we may not have seen in many years, it is going to change quite dramatically. So the rates are certainly sustainable. Now, if we look here as an example of Madrid and Barcelona, and they forecasted ADR change, this is a combination of both markets, which is a bit strange, but I took this slide anyway. You can see that the ADR has grown by 70% for those two markets combined. But as we go into the rest of the year, that's going to go right back down to more normalized levels of 2-3%. It's following the journey of inflation. So that is something that will impact all markets in 2023. But it's not to say that those 20, 30, 40% lifts in ADR in specific hotels will go backwards. These rates are sustainable and have to be maintained as we move forward. Like I said, there's no going back. This is London. Our May forecast and August forecast, we got it wrong in May. We never, ever imagined that London could do so well in ADR during the summer months. But it did, and that is expected to continue. So you're not going to see that hockey stick in 2023, but you are going to see sustained growth in key markets like London. And the last element that gives us confidence when we look at the industry as a whole is the investment in new stock, the investment in new hotels. Investors are extremely interested in our industry, and 100,000 rooms are expected to open this year alone. And then going forward into the following few years, we're looking at about 80,000 rooms every year that are opening up. That gives us confidence that there is belief in our industry, there is belief in that it's coming back and it's going to be better than before. So I wanted to put that slide in there. So in summary, occupancy is almost back to pre-COVID levels. ADR has far surpassed the prior peak, even in real terms. So remember the real versus the nominal, we're back to where we are, which means we can start making money again. Group demand remains the laggard, but occupancy on the books is showing positivity. And even when I checked in at the hotel yesterday, just asking, wow, what's happening here? There's events everywhere. They said, well, a lot of that has been, as they say in French, rapporté from the first part of the year and brought forward to the end of the year. So I expect that business demand will continue through Q4. New supply, however, will continue to come online. And of course, that always puts pressure on occupancy. But with the demand growing, occupancy will grow with that. But of course, will be tapered in certain markets when new supply comes in. And generally, the cost of living crisis, we can't ignore it, although it has been some elements of it have been factored in the short term in our forecasts. We really believe that the cost of living will slow down travel a little bit. Perhaps we will not have that compression that we had this summer, but certainly there is positive growth expected through 2023 and beyond. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Stay with us for a minute.
Okay.
I do have a few questions, because thank you so much for all the insights. And there is a microphone going around. We're going old school, no more apps, because we felt we need to do this a bit more hands-on. So if you have any questions for Aoife, please let me know. But I do have quite a few for you. So let's start with supply. Has it shrunk right now? Because in North America, I heard there's still rooms and inventory out of order or out of service because of supply chain issues, because of staffing. Is there any part of European supply that is not on the market, on the shelf at this point in time?
So we still have, we're tracking permanent closures for sure. So as you know, if you've followed our webinars over time, we tracked temporary closures throughout the pandemic. The vast majority of them reopened, and I don't have that slide in there, but I can add that in actually and share this afterwards. The vast majority have been reopened. We have seen some permanent closures, but what really has shrunk in specific markets, Dublin is a really good example of this, is due to the crisis in Ukraine, a lot of hotels have been converted for refugee usage, and that has shrunk the supply in certain markets. So there is kind of almost like a fake occupancy as such, where those hotels are closed. So there's an element of that in key markets. But permanent closures, maybe in smaller markets and smaller hotels were a thing, but not significant, I would say.
Excellent. And during the pandemic, we talked a lot about the impact of vacation rentals to travel,
Yes.
where consumers and travelers were opting for maybe more privacy and less, accommodation choices like hotels. Is that still a factor here?
So I think that Airbnb and service departments, holiday rentals, etc., it will always be there. But I think in the occupancy that you can see in Europe, it's not really impacting. There's enough demand to compensate for both.
It paints a very positive picture.
Yeah.
Is there anything keeping you up at night? Is there any headwinds that you're expecting? We talked about inflation earlier, but is there anything that you think could go wrong?
I think those economic headwinds could be worse than we expect, for sure. They're comparing it now to the 70s, that we may see stagflation. And if interest rates rise across Europe, and particularly in the UK, it's going to change dramatically the face of travel for many. The savings that I talked about, all of those savings that everyone had, is starting to expire. But we generally forecast on a very positive front. And you'll notice even in London, like I said, we're positive, but we weren't positive enough. So I think 2023 will be a good year.
Okay.
Time will tell.
Time will tell.
Time will
Excellent.
tell.
We plan on doing a HEDNA conference in Southeast Asia, Bangkok to be exact.
Uh-huh.
How is that part of the world doing? Do you have any insights there?
So recovery very, very slow in that part of the world. And like I said, a lot of it is due to that China outbound not being possible. But it is coming back, and actually by the end of 2023, all APAC cities will have fully recovered. So the likes of Bangkok, not sure when you're planning to go.
September,
okay. Get that booking in now. Before
we should get a good deal, is what you're saying?
I think you should book it now, though.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Please raise your hand if you have any questions for Aoife. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up in a few moments. I think our next panel is getting mic'd up as we speak. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate your insights. Pleasure. And it's been a pleasure having you in Paris.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.